Up next, we have Micah Turner. Micah is a cybersecurity professional based in Reno, Nevada. He served for 5 years in the U.S. Army Psychological Operations with 4 short combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now he's going to come and tell you how to message your family.
But it says, I don't know if I think it was like a little far.
Good morning. Influence is power, and like all power, it does not care about the intentions of those who wield it. It's because of that fact that it can be used for incredible good or incomprehensible evil. When I think about the greatest influencers in history, I'm reminded of how Gandhi defeated the most powerful military might of his time without expending a single bullet. But I'm also reminded of how Hitler led his people to the worst genocide in history. Influence is power, and if you can learn how to harness it, you can have a profound impact on the hearts and minds of the people in your life. I want to spend a moment focused on how important that is. In a time when it feels like we're so divided that our hearts are cast in stone, you have the power to influence the hearts and minds of the people in your life. But that leads us to the big question. How? How can we influence the behavior of people? That one question has been thought of by the greatest thinkers and organizations throughout history. But before I get into all of that, I want you to know a little bit about me and why that question is important to me, who I am as a person. Because Growing up, I always felt like an outsider, like someone and everyone had some knowledge that was uncommon, that they knew something that I didn't know. And I later came to think of that knowledge as the social contract. This semi-unspoken protocol for how to communicate effectively with other people. That started to change for me when, after high school, I joined a wildland firefighter organization. On that squad, I had a U.S. Army infantry vet named Duggar. See, I'm 6'5", and I thought I was pretty strong at the time. But Duggar was 6'8", and easily 3 times stronger than me. To me, that was not the most impressive thing about him. It was how easygoing he was with people, how generally likable he was, and how people seemed to gravitate towards him. I wanted to be more like him. And in some ways, I saw him as an older brother. He mentored me during that first fire season. And though I didn't realize it at the time, it was like an introduction to soft skills, like a 101 course. He taught me how better to relate with people. And at the end of that fire season, he asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And at 19 years old, I honestly had no idea. He suggested that I join the Army so I could have a more structured life and learn from the leaders that have a broader experience than those I would be exposed to if I stayed in my hometown. We went down to the recruiter's office the next day. My mother did not react well to that news. Her father served in World War II, and his ship was sunk. Well, he was in the Navy, and she was raised in Vietnam. I know that she was terrified by the idea that I would not come home from that experience. She cried for me, but in my heart, in my mind, I was dedicated to the idea that I would serve my country. Win the mind, win the day. That was the motto of the battalion I served with in U.S. Army Special Operations Group called Psychological Operations. I won't be sharing any PSYOP secrets with you today, but let's see what Wikipedia has to say about that. PSYOPs are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, objective reasoning, and ultimately their behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and individuals. I served 4 combat tours with psychological operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what I learned in that time helped formalize my understanding of what it means to try to communicate with people in a way that can guide them towards a goal or a way of thinking. They helped me put myself in the mindset of the target audience, to consider their circumstances, identity, ideology, propensities. Then use that context to create messaging that would be more likely to convince them to act in a way that aligns with our objectives. During my last deployment, the United States military finally succeeded in their objective to eliminate Osama bin Laden, and I thought the war was over. The war was not over. And shortly before returning home from that last deployment, Chinook helicopter, call sign Extortion 17, was shot down by RPG fire, killing 38 people and 1 military working dog. I stood on the tarmac in Bagram Airfield for 4 hours while their bodies were loaded into the airplanes to be shipped back to their families and friends. During that 4-hour period, I became furious with the military. In my mind, in my heart, I believed that they shouldn't have died because the war had already been won, and they should be at home celebrating that victory with us. Within the next year, I had joined a group called Veterans for Peace. And for the first time, I was called to speak about my experience in front of an audience using my own words. I talked about the injustice of the ongoing occupation in Afghanistan and called for peace. Ultimately, my message was not received by many people, and without the resources of the military behind me, I did not know how to spread that message further. This time in my life, I was aimless, and I didn't know what to do. My life had been defined by the Army for 6 years. But my life moves on, and I eventually needed to figure out how I would contribute to the world in my own way. That's when I discovered cybersecurity and social engineering. And in many ways, cyber was the nexus of everything that I had learned throughout my life. Putting myself in the mindset of the target audience made me great at red and blue team exercises. My soft skills allowed me to communicate technical concepts for non-technical audiences and represent the value of cyber to executives. Also, jumping out of airplanes gave me the confidence to believe that I could succeed. There really is nothing like falling from a very high distance that makes you feel invincible after you've landed. It wasn't long before I was called to speak again on my experience, this time in the context of cybersecurity. And it led me back to that big question. How can you influence people to change their behavior? In cybersecurity, we tend to think of social engineering as a one-on-one engagement, where a malicious actor is trying to exploit a victim. But that's not the entire picture. My experience in PsyOps taught me that those same tactics can be used to be applied to a much larger audience. And at scale, it has a very different way of influencing people. We need to broaden our horizons when we think about social engineering, because at different levels of scope, we see dramatic increases in impact. When applied effectively, social engineering can manipulate the outcomes of elections, laws, and even wars. We think of the atomic bomb as the most dangerous weapon on Earth, but it's politicians who launch them. That makes social engineering the most dangerous technology on the planet. We need to think proactively about how this technology works and how we can defend our people from it. This is where social engineering the people you love comes into play. Because we need to be advocating for security awareness, not just at the office, but also at home, at the dinner table, with those people in our lives that might not understand that they are the target of these attacks, that even though they might feel insignificant, that they matter to the people that are trying to influence them. It's our job as cybersecurity professionals to communicate the importance of the issue and equip decision makers with the information needed to defend against these attacks. So we see an effort to address disinformation and misinformation, and that has a lot of value. But I think there's a more succinct methodology towards trying to educate people in this way. And it's really more about training people to recognize manipulative psychology. If we could do that, disinformation wouldn't be as effective. People could recognize the mechanisms in play and use common sense strategies to vet disinformation before spreading it. So let's talk about it. Let's get verbose. Let's expand on what manipulative psychology looks like and some best practices in identifying it. Manipulators can use a wide variety of techniques, tools, and procedures, or TTPs, to get what they need from their targets. No matter the TTP, the vector will always center around a strong emotional response. That is the silver bullet detection for what to look for. The bottom line is, if someone is trying to make you feel something strongly, it's time to examine the potential motivations person in that relationship. Random internet troll makes you feel angry or scared. It's time to evaluate what they want. They are the attacker. They are attacking you. They are the enemy. And you should not value or internalize their messaging. The sad truth of the world is that most communications are designed to trigger an emotional response. And that makes it extraordinarily difficult to tell the difference between artificial emotional stimulation and potentially malicious emotional manipulation. Most malicious actors and marketers rely on some common TTPs. Common examples are immediacy. Do it now. Buy now. People market this way. They say, just do it. Just buy the product. And don't worry about checking with your IT team. I need this right now. Marketers use it. Social engineers use it. Everyone in between is using immediacy to try and short-circuit your brain to get you to do something without thinking about it. Charity. You know Rachel Toback. You know that she likes to lean on sympathy. That she'll use a crying baby to elicit a response that makes you want to help someone. Because helping people feels good. Authority. Pretexting. Some people will pretend to be the president, the CEO, your own mother, anything that can get you to believe that they have your best interests in mind. Why would IT need your password? There's no legitimate reason. Undue assistance. This comes into a similar right. Someone is offering to take a virus off of your computer. You might want to verify that there's actually a virus first. Scarcity. This idea that there's value in something just because it's rare. I think we've all felt that at some point, the fear of missing out on a limited opportunity. And social proof. Everybody's doing it. This is another function of pretexting, similar to authority, that says, all these people are on board. Shouldn't you be on board as well? And reciprocity. People feel obligated to return favors, and this can be leveraged with small gifts. Like when you do sales, right, you might think of somebody trying to give you something for free, but nothing is ever really for free. 1 second, I had a technical error. Right. So this is what we normally see in short-term attacks like phishing, but there is also a much more long-term kind of engagement where people will try to engage with you over multiple periods of time. And before moving on to what that looks like, I would just like to say that any one of those methods should be considered suspicious, but especially a combination of those methods should be considered extremely unusual. Long-term manipulation, also called grooming, is when someone tries to use the foundational elements of relationship building to endear themselves to you. So this can look like liking, eliciting empathy, humor, mutual respect, active listening, right? But that's really the crux of why this is called social engineering for people you love. Because this is human nature. Those foundational principles of influence and manipulation are founded in reality. They're built on a strong evolutionary context that has people think about how they can exist in a community. And for that, you have to trust at some level. These tenets are not just used in manipulation. They're used in building any relationship. So if attackers can use these principles to exploit a target, shouldn't we be able to use them to develop relationships, knowing that it's an effective means of building trust? Isn't that the point of a long-term relationship, being with someone you can trust? It's only the abuse of that trust that causes harm. Grooming is malicious because it has the pre-established intent to do harm. If your intention is benign, or at least transparent, you have an ethical grounds for building a relationship. It's these factors that make long-term social engineering hard to identify and talk about. An example, you may have a relative that has a strong political opinion that you don't agree with, and it ends in a difference between your core values. It's easy to think of those we disagree with as being misinformed or even brainwashed. But it can be extremely difficult to navigate the them versus us mentality. To reach common ground, the only sure way to influence the hearts and minds of people in the long term is to show them empathy and compassion. Using these tools and techniques ethically can help us build a strong relationships and increase the impact of our messaging. Take advantage of this knowledge and use it to advance the security agenda, not just at the budgeting meeting, but also at the dinner table and with your family. Influence is power. And when that power is used ethically, it can be used to enhance your interpersonal relationships and at scale, everyone on it. You have the power to influence the hearts and minds of the people in your life. Please do so responsibly. Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
I got one, Micah.
Excellent talk there, thank you. When I first saw your talk at DEF CON a few years ago, I asked you something similar. So I'll ask, when it comes to like the amount or the volume of social engineering or advertisements or sales or things like that that are coming our way, do you think our sense of intuition or that instinct is lessening, or is it growing, and how much can we trust that instinct?
You're asking about how well you can trust your intuition?
Yeah.
So I think Mr. Perkins makes a very valid point about the volume of information that we're receiving that is trying to manipulate us. It's constant. In other words, you are always at the mercy of someone or something trying to elicit an emotional response. And because these things are based in human nature and our very evolution, they're intended to circumvent your intuition. So I would not rely purely on intuition to try and understand the legitimacy of something. Just because a lot of people believe in it, the social proof, does not mean that it's real, does not mean that it's valid. There can be 8 billion flat earthers on this planet, and I will still not be convinced that that's the truth just because it's what they believe. So, unfortunately, trusting intuition alone is not advisable in my opinion.
I just have a reaction, and I guess I would like to know what your opinion is of it. I was along with you all along until like the very end, and it sort of feels icky when you still like develop a power over another person, because it seems like there could be a great temptation to abuse it eventually. Well, what's your opinion about that versus maybe building an equality with other people instead of trying to? It feels like it's not, people are not on equal footing there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that equal footing has to come with awareness, right? So I totally agree with you. When you, or like me, right, have like a deeper understanding of social dynamic before you engage with someone, it's your responsibility to act ethically within that framework. And until you have the ability to give them awareness into that same level playing field, you have to be extra cautious. When I engage with people, my major intention is to listen to them first, right? Because I understand that I have a better understanding of what it means to influence and manipulate people, and also it just is a better benefit to me. So the same social practices that go into building good relationships are something that should be the forefront of your engagement with people rather than the secondary to your objective. If you go to people and you intend to have them conform to your objective, then it is very easy to fall into this unequal power paradigm. But if you're willing to start on the basis of active listening, mutual respect, sympathy, and empathy, I think you have a good foundation for starting the relationship on neutral terms.
Good morning.
Good morning.
When it comes to manipulation and influence, there's always a fine line. So for me, it's pretty difficult to really identify when it's manipulation and when it's influence. For example, the elections are going on. There's a lot of stuff that people can perceive as being manipulated, but at the same time, there's the fine line that it could just be influence. So what's your definition for influence compared to manipulation?
That is an excellent question. And it is a fine line and a balance. But I know that I touched on this a little bit, but a strong emotional response. So when I say like strong emotional response, I want you to think this emotional response is so strong that it's overwhelming my capacity for logical reasoning, that I am not able to observe the facts because I am so emotionally engaged in the argument that's being presented to me. When things are not relying, like, the election is one of these examples, right? And it's full of emotional rhetoric. But you have to try to think about distancing yourself from the argumentation. Because if a policymaker is running on their platform, it should be on the policies that they're trying to implement, not on the shortcomings of their opponent or on the personal failings of the people that support that opponent. And so it's a hard question to answer because it is very much a spectrum of truth that we are engaged with, because there is no such thing as objective truth. We can try to understand objective truths through science and logic and observation, but that is just not, our reality is just too messy for that to be completely black and white. There will always be a spectrum of gray. So, my first piece of advice is to take a breath, right? To try to calm the emotional response so that you can sit in the position of reasoning and understand that almost anyone who's presenting logic to you is doing so from a place of influence and manipulation.
Thank you so much. This is definitely a fruitful discussion, and you will be around to have more discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.